fulfill my appointed presumed role as a philosopher in the school.
Yeah, speaking about the funny function, right?
Yes. So I prepared actually two notes about the concept of the holopticism. Two notes. I hope that I will have the time to go over both of them because I think they are important. The first note is I want to connect this concept of holopticism to this Buckminster Fuller's Pirates. So in this manual for spaceship Earth, I picked up a quote that I really liked from this book. For me, it's if it was only this quote, it was enough. I want to read it to you very quickly. So Buckminster Fuller writes, it's about pirates in the sea. Of course, it is a metaphor. Real pirates were something else, but maybe sometimes I call these sea mastering people the great outlaws or great pirates, the GP simply, because the arbitrary laws enacted or edicted by men on the land could not be expanded effectively to control humans beyond their shores out upon the seas. So the worldmen who lived on the seas were inherently outlaws, and the only laws they could and did rule them were the natural laws, the physical laws of the universe, which when tempestuous were often cruelly devastating. Their battle took place out of sight of landed humanity. Most of the losers went to the bottom of utterly unbeknownst to historians. Those who stayed on the top of the waters and prospered did so because their comprehensive capability. They were the antithesis of specialists. They had highly proficiency in dealing with celestial navigation, the storms, the weather, the sea, the man, the ship, economics, biology, geography, history, and science. The wider and more long distance their anticipatory strategy, the more successful they became. So what is here the connection? The connection I see is that we need to think about holopticism not only in relation to the interactions between humans or cognitive agents, but in the overall relationships and interactions between subjects and objects, where at times subjects are perceived as objects and vice versa. And this is something which is happening in every social environment and social happening. In this broader sense, also knowledge, skill, thoughts, objects of imaginations, and intentions are objects in this very same sense. So this is the first connection that I see, that we have to broaden our understanding of holopticism to include also situations, objects, ideas, and not only relationships between humans or cognitive agents in groups, but something which is broader that includes basically all and everything. And now, what is this idea of Buckminster's, and in the light of what it needs to be understood? So he was not the first to speak about generalism. Somewhere during the Renaissance, or maybe the Renaissance time, or a little bit before that, people, at least in Europe, but not only, also in the Middle East, in other places, were familiar with this concept of polymath. Or in Latin, homo universalis, which was a designation for individual or whose knowledge spans a substantial number of subjects, known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge and to solve specific problems. In the Italian Renaissance, there was this guy, Battista Alberti, it's the 14th century, who claimed a man can do all things if he will. So this was the idea of a polymath, and it was the basic tenet of Renaissance humanism, is that humans are limitless in their capacity for development. And this led to this concept led to the notion that people should embrace all knowledge and develop their capacities as fully as possible. And while nowadays the idea or the concept of Renaissance man is basically applied to gifted people that have extraordinary abilities and accomplishments, I would like to suggest that this is not exactly so. It is the idea of Renaissance man extends beyond extraordinary capabilities that is the gift of just specific and rare human beings. And nowadays, quite a few centuries ahead of this Renaissance period, this concept of polymath, of Renaissance man, was somehow, I think, was revived by Robert Ruth Bernstein. And he made the distinction between what he calls specialists, dilettantes, and polymath. So the specialist, we all know, is one that takes who pursues a very deep knowledge of a very specific area or a topic of knowledge, and specializes in this. He becomes an expert. Contrary to this investment in becoming a specialist, there are the dilettantes that pursue very, very general knowledge in many, many topics, but not particularly deep in any particular field, and they remain kind of having superficial knowledge about many things, but not knowing too much about anything in particular. And contrary to this, Robert Ruth Bernstein, he claimed that there is this kind of person who is a polymath, who is neither a specialist nor a dilettante, but both of them in some sense, because such a person is able to specialize in a number of areas or topic of knowledge, and is able to show fairly deep competence in more than one subject. And this was a kind of idea that he developed. But behind this idea is that there are that the polymath is able to process in his mind or to make available to his mind what he called intuitive tools of thinking that are general or universal, but when they come into actuation, they need to find their expression in a specific manner, in a specific field, and specific products. And so this is the idea of a polymath is one that is able to access this universal intuitive tool of thinking. Now, I was asking myself, how can we augment this idea of polymath? And I believe that the difference between specialization and being a specialist or a generalist is a matter of cultivating the mind in the developmental and educational process. I think that the unfoldment of being and thinking of a human is not a priori universal or domain specific. It's neither universal as Bernstein is claiming, and it's not domain specific as we see that people tend to in nowadays and for along the history were tending to specialize. I think that the brain is plastic enough in order to be shaped into different kinds of mind. And in this sense, minds are above all cultural products. So what I have in mind is cultivating something that I would call a healthy and plastic balance between generalist and specialist tendencies in each and every individual. And to make both of them, both tendency to specialization and the tendency to generalization, to make both of them available as the distinctive characteristics of what I would call neo-Renaissance men. And I think this is nowadays is when we are living in times of accelerated change, increasing complexity and extreme interconnectivity. And I think this balance between being a generalist and being a specialist combined with the idea of holopticism, including objects, knowledge, systems, groups, and even psychological situations, whether of specific individuals or of groups of individuals working together. I think this is one of the ideas that connects Buckminster Fuller's pirates to this concept of holopticism. And two examples that I want to give you that I think are indicative to the need in this is that one example that I want to say just to give a brief knowledge about is this company called SpaceX. I think that all of you have some knowledge about it. This in a very short time, SpaceX, managed by Elon Musk, became a breakthrough revolutionary company, revolutionizing space industry, space travel, etc. And the problem of such a company is that it has underhand extremely complex breakthrough projects. Breakthrough projects, I mean things that were not tried before, like trying to go to Mars, trying to go to go back to the moon, to reuse spacecrafts, etc. And the problem of such huge and complex projects is the integration of many subsystems into larger systems, and the integration of this larger system into yet larger systems, and this is happening across different dimensions and also across time, because it's always very, very fast moving. Because all these revolutions that SpaceX is doing is really within a span of time, which is, I think, less than 10 years, which is almost unbelievable compared to anything else that humanity has done, even in the 20th century. And Elon Musk is that envisioned the strategy, the research and development strategy of SpaceX. He once said, what is the secret of this company? Is that every engineer is a chief engineer, meaning that every engineer working on the smallest screw that needs to connect this to that in the smallest component of a missile or whatever, or economist that needs to figure out how to put all the failures into the finance sheet of the company or things like this. Every one of them knows the big picture, maybe not to the details. And this is the solution to the integration problem, because everybody should have enough knowledge, not about only the subsystem that he designed, he or she are designing, but needs to have a complete knowledge of how all the things are being assembled together. So this is one very prominent example in my eyes to this holopticism, but including also objects and systems, etc. And maybe a more fun example is this idea of Sasha was speaking about sports and football. So this idea of total football is, I think it is employed now by this Barcelona club of football. And classically, football players had specializations over the field. Those that run forward, those that keep on in the defense, the one that stands in the goal. And the total football, it was, I think, conceptualized by Johan Cruyff, who was, I think, from the Netherlands, is that every player can be fairly competent in playing every role on the field, while everyone has its own specialization, but everyone can also play everything else. So again, this is an idea of just to add these examples. So this, I think that this connects to again to the connection between holopticism and knowledge and objects, because if we want to develop and cultivate open-ended minds, which I think is a formidable challenge, I would like to see knowledge as facilitating sight, intelligence, and creativity, and not necessarily function or identity as they serve today. What do I mean by that is that when I specialize in something, it does not define me as an individual and not as a function in society. It is an object. When I have some knowledge, some know-how, or some skill, when I develop or able to do something, when I become competent in something, it is an object, but it is not necessarily an object of identity. So what do you want to be when you become, when you grow up? It's a nice question, but I think it's a wrong question. I want to be everything, and I don't want to be, and I want to be nothing at all. And this is part of a certain attitude in forming minds as polymaths. And I would also add to this that the ability to see in the broader sense, to understand the thinking of others, the extended ability to interact, criticize, appreciate, and finally consciously incorporate the thinking processes of other minds into mine, and I'm using your idea, Marta, here. So to incorporate the thinking processes of other minds and also of other objects, this seems to me a way to think about holopticism in a somewhat broader sense than what was the idea of Jean-Francois Nobel. And I think this can be made into a guiding principle of a developmental program in the school, but it inherently needs to involve all the stakeholders, not only the students. It's the teachers, the facilitators, the parents, and maybe even the spaces and the objects that are facilitating the everyday operations. So this is one note. I don't know if I have time for another one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hmm?
Go ahead.
So the other one would seem to you a little bit, might seem to, at this stage, might seem a bit obscure, but I found it important to mention, and this is a philosophical note about holopticism. So you can notice that holopticism, because it contains the root of optic, it immediately associates with sight. And I want to mention that sight is only one modality of sensing, and it is very special. And I want to just give you some notion or some idea by what sight is special and different from other senses that we possess. In some sense, sight is the freest and at the same time least realistic of all senses. Because if you think a little bit deeper about reality, reality is mostly and primarily evidenced in resistance, impact, and force. Something that we feel in touch experience. And you know, this is almost a cliche. How do we know that something is real? When we kick it, it kicks back. Yes, there is a certain sense of being affected. Trying to affect something, immediately I'm being affected, and now I'm speaking about something which is really physical. And we have to notice that there is no force experience and no transitive causality which is involved in the nature of image. When we perceive an image, when we see something, when we look around, only the image does not cause us anything. Everything it causes us is already something which is happening in our minds and the ideas that we have, but the things that we see never operate force on us. They are not resisting us in any sense, okay? So And what it gives us is that the perceiver is entirely free from causal involvement in the things perceived. And therefore, sight is effortless on our side and allows us to act upon the image with our mind without actually interacting with what is imaged. And this gives rise to the involvement of imagination, of speculation, of theorizing, but also inevitably, it also creates a sense of distance, separation, and indifference. So, what is important, if I want to summarize this whole explanation, is that sight allows us the distance. It allows us this distance by that it separates difference from intensity. Usually, when we meet something with all of us, when we interact with something, difference and intensity are basically one. Intensity, I mean, when some change happens, we also feel the resistance or the change in our body. And sight, in some sense, let us feel the difference without the consequences of the intensity which is being involved. And this is, I think, is extremely important. One more point about this conceptualization is that sight also is one of the main creator of what we consider as objectivity, because the visual space for us is initially static in relation to us as observers, as subjects, and this allows us as agents to become aware to my own dynamism, to my own intentions, to my own actions operating on something which is presumed passive environment. And why passive environment? Because when I see something, it not immediately affects me causally, because it is distance. It can be kilometers from me. Okay, so just to make the point here, I would like to suggest to the that we need to extend the concept of holopticism beyond sight and towards a more inclusive concept that signifies a wider cognitive array, including also, but not limited to, touch. We need to include all our interactive modalities with the environment into this extended concept of holopticism, and to think about in different situations, different relationships between differences and intensity within interactions. So this may be a bit far-reaching in the sense of how to actualize it and how to embody it into actual interactions. But I think that this is a better way to think about holopticism.